Hello everyone, our topic is what are China's foreign policy goals and its relations with Africa? To what extent is China succeeding in achieving those goals? Part 1 Introduction, Background and History. First, brief introduction of Africa. Africa is second largest continent, covering about one-fifth of the total land surface of Earth. The continent is bounded on the west by the Atlantic Ocean, on the north by the Mediterranean Sea, on the east by the Red Sea and Indian Ocean. With 1.3 billion people as of 2018, it accounts for about 60% of the world's human. Because of the population advantage, Africa has the potential to be one of the world's largest consumer markets. Third, Africa contains an enormous wealth of mineral resources, and Africa is experiencing fast economic growth but still vulnerable. Africa's GDP growth is marginally above the world average for 2018 and well above the average of advanced economies. It also exceeds that of emerging and developing economies outside Africa, excluding China and India. According to the IMF's 2020 outlook, released in October, GDP was predicted to fall by minus 1.3% in North Africa and by minus 3.3% in sub-Saharan Africa. And fifth, the contribution to Africa's growth is good to a few regions and countries. And Africa's growth performance is not equitable and exclusive. Extreme poverty and inequity are higher in Africa than in other world regions. 1.2 The history of Sino-Africa relations. The Bandung Conference of 1950 marked the beginning of a Chinese interest and policy in Africa. During 1966 to 1979, the Cultural Revolution changed the direction of China's foreign policy towards Africa. And in 1971, the People's Republic of China gained a seat in UN. Actually, Africa played a vital role in the process of China's being offered a UN seat. During 1966 to 1979, Premier Zhou Enlai outlined 8 principles for China's economic aid and technical assistance to other countries. Over more than 5 decades later, it still remain unchanged and have underwritten China's competitive advantage over the United States in developing countries. And starting in the 1980s and the economic reforms under Deng Xiaoping's leadership, China scaled down its international ambitions and shifted its foreign policy to focus on greater power diplomacy.
In this part, I will discuss China's foreign policy goals in Africa, China's modern initiatives and interests in Africa. And this part contains these 4 topics: Africa in China's foreign policy, Africa in China's foreign strategy, China's modern initiatives in Africa, and the conclusion, China's foreign policy goals and interests in Africa. So for the first topic, during the President Hu's administration, China began to adopt the principle of an all-round, all-directional foreign policy that theoretically does not differentiate among geographical regions or countries. Chinese foreign policy is not about relationship with a particular region or country. China emphasizes balanced diplomacy and seeks to develop ties with all important powers in the world. So for China, big powers are the key. China's periphery is a priority. Developing countries are the foundation. Multilateral platforms are the stage. Compared with China's neighbors and big powers, the category of developing countries to which African nations belong constitutes the foundation of China's foreign policy. a means rather than an end to China's relationship with more important parts of the world. Africa is a low priority issue for China's foreign policy in general and belongs to the category of developing countries. Its importance is mostly as a means to China's political and economic ends. Africa in general is excluded from the strategically important category and does not reach the highest level of decision making. Within Africa, different countries also carry different weight in China's Africa policy. Generally speaking, two types of African countries are more likely to receive a higher level of attention in China's policymaking. First, regional leaders, such as South Africa and Kenya, are given more emphasis because of their regional or international political and economic influence. As a fellow BRICS country, South Africa is seen by China as a strong emerging power partner with great potential for collaboration bilaterally and against the traditional Western powers. Second, problematic countries such as Sudan and Zimbabwe require more attention, not only because China has large vested economic interests in their national resources, but also because their volatile internal politics often raise international concern and spark criticism that China is propping up these authoritarian regimes through economic deals and international political support. As for China's modern initiatives in Africa, in March 2013, President Xi put forward the concept of the right approach to justice and interests during his visit to Africa, which was established as the governing principle after the 18th National Congress of the CCP, aiming to develop China-Africa friendship and cooperative relationships more efficiently. In April 2013, President Xi Jinping first put forward the concept of community of shared future. And then in December 2015, the Chinese government released China's policy paper on Africa, emphasizing the community of shared future between China and Africa. Then twice in 2015 and 2018, Xi points out that China's goals to Africa are sincere friendship and equality, mutual benefit and common prosperity, mutual support and close cooperation, learn from each other and seek common development. China hopes to establish the comprehensive strategic partnership with Africa. In July 2018, Xi delivered a speech at the 10th BRICS Summit, calling for deepening people-to-people exchanges and cooperation and building a network of close cooperative relations. The meeting decided to launch the BRICS New Industrial Revolution Partnership. And about the One Belt One Road, in September 2016, Lin Songtian pointed out that Africa is an important direction and foothold for the One Belt One Road. In May 2017, the official document released by BBS at the summit of One Belt One Road International Cooperation clearly states that Africa is a key partner to build One Belt One Road. And in September 2018, China and Africa agreed to align the One Belt One Road with the UN 2030 Agenda and the African Union 2063 Agenda. So China needs Africa's support for the CCP's domestic political legitimacy and for China's foreign policy agenda internationally. And Africa also means rich natural resources and potential market for China. As for the security interest, China also needs to protect Chinese investment and personnel in Africa. So just like President Xi pointed out that China's foreign policy goals in Africa is to establish the comprehensive strategic partnership with Africa. However, the relationship between China and Africa is a way for China to build its prestige in the world, and it is a means rather than an end for China.
Part 3 is what has been achieved now. There are 5 parts. First is infrastructure connectivity and trade enhancement, cultural exchange, military cooperation, and the public health. The first one is infrastructure connectivity. Infrastructure projects are characterized by high cost, long time, and high technical requirements. China has abundant funds and relative perfect infrastructure capacity, so construction in African countries, on the one hand, can effectively improve the problem of China's export simplification. On the other hand, resources restructuring can be carried out in the world to solve the problem of excess capacity and also promote RMB internationalism and improve China's international image. In recent years, China has built a large number of roads, railways, bridges, airports, schools, hospitals, and so on in African countries. These projects have helped Africa advance their new industrialism and economic growth. Among them, the successful construction of railway project plays a positive role in reducing the pressure of the local transportation, improving the investment environment, and increasing employment. Infrastructure construction are significant to not only the economic development of African countries, but also the promotion of One Belt, One Road. Were delivered, and the total revenue of passenger and freight transportation were $73.79 billion. And the next is the trade enhancement. China-Africa cooperation has a sound complementarity and mutual benefit. Africa's low labor costs, rich natural resources, and production materials, urbanism, and rapid growth of the middle class. This have provided a vast international market for Chinese enterprises. At the same time, African countries are actively promoting strategic plans for industrial development and improving their business environment. All this have improved further investment cooperation between China and Africa. Since 2009, China has been Africa's largest trading partner for 10 consecutive years. By the end of 2017, more than 3,500 Chinese enterprises had invested and operated in Africa. In 2018, trade between China and Africa stood at $204.2 billion, up 20% year-on-year, and the largest increase since 2012. In the 2019, bilateral trade between China and Africa reached $280.7 billion, up 2.21% year-on-year. China invested $3 billion in Africa and $55.9 billion in newly contracted projects in Africa, accounting for 21.5% of China's total contracts signed abroad. The turnover of contracted projects in Africa was $46 billion, accounting for 26.6% of China's total contracted projects completed abroad. And about cultural exchange, China and Africa have continuously expanded cooperation in cultural exchange, implemented the plan of an intergovernmental cultural agreements, maintained mutual visits and dialogues between governments at all levels, and at the same time strengthened non-governmental exchange. China-Africa cultural exchange are deepening, which is manifested in the prominent role of platforms such as advanced exchange mechanism and China-Africa joint research and exchange programs. Activities such as 10,000 of people traveling to Africa, China-Africa Film and Television Corporation Forum, and China-Africa Cultural Exchange Week have been carried out. Africa Confucius Institute, Confucius Classroom, Chinese Culture Center, Africa Museums, Luban workshops, and so on are continuously increasing. Exchanges in the cultural field are conducive to the export of Chinese culture and also deepen the understanding of the Chinese people and culture among African countries. Next is military cooperation. China's military assistance to Africa began at the first stage at China's foreign military cooperation. The formal training of military personnel from African countries began at stage 2, according to statistics from 1964 to 1978. The Chinese Army has trained military personnel for more than 40 countries, dispatched over 6,400 military experts, and accepted more than 8,000 foreign military edits, of which Africa accounted for a considerate proportion. Since the reform and opening up, apart from continuing to provide military aid, Chinese arms sales to Africa have also become part of China-Africa military cooperation. The content of security cooperation from the late 1980s to the present has expanded to consular cooperation and China's participation in UN peacekeeping operation in Africa. Since the 1990s to the end of February 2010, the United Nations took a total of 45 peacekeeping operations, of which Africa accounted for 7, and China participated in 6 of them. China is the country with the largest number of the peacekeepers among the permanent members of the UN Security Council, and is also the country with the largest number of the peacekeepers in Africa. While expanding the areas of Sino-Africa security cooperation, military exchange between China and African countries have continued to increase. African countries are implementing the Silent the Gun by 2020 initiative through the China-Africa Peace and Security Cooperation Fund. The Chinese government supports the national defense and the army building of the African countries, hoping to enhance the sense of security of Africa. The last is the public health about COVID-19. At the beginning of the epidemic, Africa firmly supported China's fight against the COVID-19. Countries such as Egypt and South Africa provided China with relevant anti-epidemic materials assistance. Equatorial Guinea and Djibouti, which are also least development countries in the world, also generously devoted to the Chinese government $2 million and $1 million respectively to fight the epidemic. While Africa is suffering from the epidemic, China also rushed to help Africa, add with anti-epidemic supplies, dispatch medical expert teams, help train and share prevention and control measures and experience. So far, China has provided a large amount of medical aid material to more than 50 African countries and the African Union, and has been invited to send a team of 148 anti-epidemic medical experts to 11 African countries. Chinese non-governmental organizations, Chinese-funded enterprises in Africa, and 46 Chinese medical aid teams based in Africa have also actively participated in aid to Africa. For example, the Jackie Ma Public Welfare Foundation and the Alibaba Public Welfare Foundation, led by Chinese entrepreneur Jackie Ma, have provided a large number of anti-epidemic materials to almost all African countries.
Welcome to part 4, Criticisms, Shortcomings, and African Public Opinion. There is much to be lauded regarding China's engagement in Africa. China promotes its economic and cultural exchanges as win-win. However, Chinese foreign policy in Africa is still subject to much criticism. And the biggest and most important criticism of the China-African relationship is the debt issue. In 2021, 30% of Africa's debt service payments went to China. And you can see here on the graph some of the other sources. The total cumulative loans to African nations are massive. And by 2017, it was clear that these debts were unsustainable. However, if we look into the data a bit more, a huge amount of this is going to one country, especially in 2016, Angola, for oil projects. So if you take that away, it looks a bit more normal compared to other loan sources. What's remarkable here is the explosion of non-Chinese private loans, which you can see in green up at the top. China's investment is heavily concentrated in transportation and natural resources. Natural resources are known for creating enclave economies, which don't help the broader economy. So they make up an important part of the mix and receive a huge amount of scrutiny and attention. But Chinese loans are consistent with the overall trend. The actual terms and viability of these debt loads seem to be roughly equivalent to alternative sources for development loans, although there is criticism that they don't do as much blanket forgiveness and don't have as much transparency. Overall, there are about 10 countries in Africa with dangerous, unsustainable debt loads owed to China in Africa. So what does this mean? For liberal internationalists, not much. China and Africa both benefit, and there are new options for trade, financing, and exchange. That means more competition and more autonomy for Africa. For realists, however, right, this could be laying the groundwork for China upending the current global order, right, the start of a new Chinese empire, where China becomes the centerpiece of global public goods, etc. Some researchers argue that this is trying to create dependency and not debt traps, right? As China becomes an indispensable nation in terms of export markets, critical imports, and irreplaceable economic and political connections, it gains power. So what will China do in the future with all of this power? It gives them political leverage. China has not shied away from using its economic and political leverage to push African nations on its goals in the United Nations and Taiwan. From 2010 to 2018, 3 of the last 4 Taiwanese allies in Africa dropped recognition. Are these countries doing this because their populations agree with Chinese positions in international politics? Or are they ignoring public opinion in favor of cold economic and political calculations? Again, a lot of this concern is what will China do with this power in the future. If you assume China is a pragmatic offensive realist, then there is cause for concern depending on who you are. If you're an African nation, or if you're Europe or the United States, etc. Someone happy with the current global order. One issue about China's loans and debt trap diplomacy, so-called, is about loan transparency, right? These are not very transparent loans. Neither the Chinese side nor the borrowers are allowed to disclose the specific terms of the loans, and this is definitely something that needs work. There are also asymmetric power relations, right? China is a very large, economically powerful country, and it maintains a huge power imbalance compared to the countries that it is negotiating with. Can China get more out of these countries than they're getting in return, right? They use Chinese money to hire Chinese companies, Chinese workers, promote Chinese technology, etc. Right? So are African nations getting enough economic spillover effects to help their own development? Or are they just digging themselves further into dependency? And if so, is that not the definition of neocolonialism? One thing China is able to do with these big projects is set international standards. It pushes smaller countries to adopt its technical and technological standards, especially regarding construction, finance, data management, technology. And as hinted at in the 2021 white paper, China's International Development Cooperation in the New Era, this may start to also set international standards for global governance. A big concern there is about surveillance, censorship, and technology. Right? Does Chinese infrastructure give China a backdoor surveillance power? The African Union has accused China of hacking its computers. China exports its technology to help governments surveil, censor, and control their own populations. Right? So is this non-interference, or does this help export an authoritarian model? Another interesting example is right here in Hong Kong. You can visit their offices in Admiralty. Frontier Services Group is a private military contractor backed up by CITIC Group and actually run by Eric Prince of Blackwater, who is about one step away from being a war criminal through his company's activities in Iraq. Right, so having all these investments all over the world means that you need to protect them. So you send in people with guns and helicopters and things like that. And so protecting these economic interests can potentially lead to mission creep, right? There's some that argue that Japan's colonization of Manchuria started in exactly this way. Finally, African public opinion is something that we should all care about, right? Africa enjoys its trade relations with China. 59% of those surveyed think that China's economic and political influence has overall been positive. But African public opinion still slightly prefers American developmental models. Across the 18 countries surveyed, 32% preferred American development model, while 23% preferred the Chinese model. Moreover, 68% of Africans prefer liberal, democratic forms of government compared to the alternatives. Right, so finally, my discussion question for later is, are no strings attached policies really neutral? Cheers.
Part 5, Conclusion and Recommendations. First, from Beijing's point of view, Africa is a continent that is vital to China's continued economic growth as well as to expanding its global influence. China's soft power surge in Africa also serves its long-term interest to deepen and broaden its place in the global economy. Second, China has adopted an aggressive yet distinctive strategy to integrate with African economies. What it has achieved is impressive. China has become one of the largest trade partners, investors, and aid donors on the continent. Its strategy for making friends is good for China and indeed is not a bad thing for Africa and its traditional development partners. Third, what we should acknowledge that China will have difficulty projecting its soft power. Many scholars have identified the reasons, which include low GDP per capita, lack of NGOs, a non-democratic political system, and corruption. More importantly, China has not yet offered a potentially universal political value or economic model that might be an alternative to the dominant US values or model. Thus, China's soft power in Africa still have a long way to go. Gearing the relationship towards value creation and interdependence, China would fail to be a long-term partner of Africa when and if it directs its relationship along a sole motive of resource exploitation and trade at the expense of local economies. The domestic and international contents also matters. What China can do in regard to soft power depends upon how successfully China can sustain its rapid economic growth. As China continues to grow economically and change politically, its intensified quest will continue to improve its soft power in order to create an external environment conducive to its development. Also, for Africa, African countries need more negotiators who are versed in Chinese language and culture. They need to hold their ground more in terms of setting standards. They need their own think tank so they don't rely on Chinese information and or Africa or European think tanks. They should press China for less financing and more greenfield investments, as well as more localization and transparencies. That's all. Thank you very much.